Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're really getting into something fascinating. The incredible power of narrative, of worldview.
That's right. We're exploring this core idea, which sounds simple but is really profound. It's about how the basic stories we believe about ourselves, about the world, they don't just influence things.
They actually shape them.
Exactly. They shape nations, our institutions, even our, everyday lives and choices. We're looking past the surface politics here.
Down to the deep structure of culture.
And our sources today, they're making a pretty compelling case that culture isn't really driven by politicians passing laws, not primarily anyway.
So what drives it then?
A deeper set of stories, philosophical convictions, you could say, a shared narrative.
Yeah.
So the goal for you listening is to really grasp this mechanism.
Or maybe challenge some assumptions.
Definitely. Assumptions about what success really means and how influence actually works in the world. It might not be what you think.
Okay, so where do we start? With the big picture.
Actually, let's start small, with the individual. Because the sources argue that any real transformation has to begin with a single voice.
Your voice. My voice.
Right. The idea is that every single person has a gift, some unique knowledge or understanding. Maybe joy, maybe pain, maybe a skill, something God has placed within you.
Something you're meant to contribute.
Precisely, to the culture around you. But what happens when that voice goes silent?
Like that anecdote we came across. About the artist.
Exactly. This Christian artist making truly beautiful paintings, really impactful work, and then she just stopped.
Why? What happened?
She came to believe that her art wasn't, quote, spiritual enough, that she should only be doing things that seemed, overtly religious, church activities maybe.
Wow, so she sidelined her art.
Completely. And this was decades ago. She never went back to it.
And the source really emphasized the cost of that, didn't it?
Hugely. Think about it. How much poorer is the world today because she didn't paint for all those years? How many people might have been touched, blessed, maybe even changed by what she could have shared through her art?
But she held it back.
She did. And that story really illustrates the potential cost when someone withdraws their unique voice, their gift, from the very sphere God called them to influence.
So that individual responsibility, how does it connect to the bigger picture? The community or national level?
Well, it links directly to what the sources call the historical mandate. Why did God choose the Hebrew people in the Old Testament? The text says they were the least of nations.
Not the biggest or strongest.
Not at all. And Genesis 12 is key here. God blessed Abraham.
Well, yeah.
Why? Not just for Abraham's own benefit. It says he was blessed to be a blessing.
To others.
To the nations. The purpose was always outward focus, not just internal enrichment.
And that same outward focus, that applies to the church, too.
Absolutely. Look at the Great Commission in Matthew 28. The command is to disciple nations, not just gather individual believers into a building.
Okay, so that's a crucial distinction. Discipling nations versus just individuals.
It is. And the sources are pretty insistent on redefining what church even means. It's not the building, it's the people. The koinonia, the community, the ecclesia.
The gathered assembly, but also the scattered people.
Right. And if our main measure of success becomes, say, seating capacity, how many people can we get inside the walls on a Sunday morning?
Then we're missing the point.
The sources argue that's just adopting the world's measure of success. It's focusing on the gathering, not the scattering.
So what should the focus be, especially for leaders?
Preparing the congregation for Monday, for where God has actually placed them to live and work out in the world during the week. That's where the mission happens.
That's the Monday test idea you mentioned. How does a pastor, practically speaking, equip people for Monday if Sunday services have been the main focus for so long?
It's about a shift in understanding, realizing the mission is fulfilled primarily when the people are scattered, using the tools and encouragement they received when they were gathered.
Okay, so the Sunday gathering fuels the Monday scattering.
Exactly, which leads to a really challenging question the sources pose for you, the listener.
Okay, I'm ready.
If your church building, the physical structure, disappeared overnight, completely vanished, would anyone in the surrounding community, outside the church members, actually notice? Would they miss its presence or impact?
Oof. That's a tough question. It
Yeah.
really measures the actual engagement, doesn't it?
It does. It cuts through the internal metrics and asks about external impact. Are we blessing the nations, the community around us?
And often that lack of engagement, that inward focus, the sources suggest it stems from a kind of confused worldview.
Yes, that brings us to another really critical idea, the conflict between two different ways of understanding the gospel message itself.
Okay, what are they?
The sources label them the Greek gospel versus the gospel of the kingdom. Now, these are just labels they use to make a distinction.
Right. So the Greek gospel, what does that entail?
As they define it, it tends to separate the spiritual from the physical. It prioritizes the spiritual realm, sometimes almost to the exclusion of the physical world. Things like saving souls become the only thing that matters.
And that naturally leads to focusing inward on church stuff rather than work or politics or culture.
It can, yes, because those things are seen as worldly or less important than the spiritual things. But the gospel of the kingdom, on the other hand,
That's different.
very different. It emphasizes that God created both the heavens and the earth. Both are important. The goal isn't just escaping earth for heaven, but bringing God's kingdom principles to bear on earth, transforming the here and now.
So it integrates faith with all of life, physical and spiritual.
Precisely. And this clash of worldviews, this tension, it plays out very clearly in areas like education.
The education debate.
Hmm.
Yeah, the sources talked a lot about the challenges parents face with public schools today.
Immense challenges. Because think about it, when a public school system funded by the state is actively teaching a specific set of secular values.
Like what, for example?
Well, ideas like humans being fundamentally just animals, driven by instinct and pleasure, or the idea that gender and sexuality are completely fluid, things you choose for yourself without any external reference point.
That's a narrative being taught.
A powerful narrative drilled in day after day, and it often directly contradicts a biblical narrative, which says a child is made in God's image, inherently valuable, with a purpose beyond just personal gratification.
The sources use some strong language there, saying the state sometimes seeks to create compliant robots. What's behind that kind of claim?
I think the point they're making is that any state-run system, by its nature, tends to want citizens whose primary worldview and loyalty align with the state's goals. It can be uncomfortable with worldviews rooted in transcendent truths that might challenge state authority.
So the state's narrative versus a biblical narrative.
It's a fundamental conflict over whose story gets to define reality for the next generation.
So if public school presents that challenge, what's the alternative the sources point to? Just sending kids to a private religious school?
Not necessarily just any religious school. The sources make a careful distinction here. A school isn't automatically offering a biblical worldview just because it has Bible class and chapel.
What's the key difference then?
The key is whether the entire curriculum, the whole approach to learning and life, is framed within a comprehensive biblical narrative. Does it shape how you understand history, science, art, everything?
Not just adding a religious layer on top of a basically secular education.
Exactly. And fundamentally, the sources place the responsibility for education squarely on the parents, not the state.
Which is a pretty countercultural idea today.
It is, but they point to things like the rise of homeschooling co-ops as a creative response. You see parents pooling their skills, maybe a poet teaches literature and art, a mathematician teaches math to the group's kids.
Creating a whole learning community.
Yes, and they argue the kids coming out of these environments are often incredibly articulate, able to converse well with adults and peers because their education is integrated and applied within a community context. It's not just abstract information.
Okay, so we have these competing worldviews, these narratives. How do they actually spread and take hold in a culture?
The mechanics of influence. The sources lay out three main pathways for ideas.
3 ways. Yeah.
First, ideas spread horizontally. Think geographically, around the world. This is what fuels global missions, for instance, sharing ideas across cultures.
Makes sense. What's the second?
Second, through time. Ideas are passed down from one generation to the next, shaping the future. Education is key here, obviously.
Horizontally through time. And the third?
And third, crucially, ideas spread vertically. This is about penetrating the different layers of a single culture from top to bottom. And the sources argue this is the primary way a nation's character is shaped.
Vertically, like a hierarchy.
Exactly, and they propose a pretty specific hierarchy of influence. It might surprise you who they put at the top.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I might guess politicians or maybe business leaders?
Nope. According to these sources, at the very peak are the intellectuals and academics, the philosophers, the theologians, the deep thinkers.
Really? Why them?
Because they're the ones who originate the fundamental ideas. They ask the big questions about reality, truth, meaning, and they propose the answers that eventually shape everything else.
Okay, intellectuals at the top. Who's next?
Right below them, the artists, writers, musicians, filmmakers, poets, painters. The sources call them the most culturally sensitive group.
Sensitive how?
They pick up on the new philosophical ideas bubbling up from the intellectuals before almost anyone else. And they translate those abstract ideas into forms that connect with people emotionally.
Through songs, stories, images.
Exactly. They speak these ideas through their art to the wider culture. Remember that quote from Andrew Fletcher? Give me the songs of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws.
Because the songs shape the heart before the laws shape the behavior.
That's the idea. The artists normalize concepts, make them palatable, make them desirable, long before they become policy.
Which leads to that. Well, that striking case study they use, Madonna.
Yeah. The sources use her as an example of someone who has been, in their words, an incredibly effective discipler of nations through art and media.
Wait, hold on. The sources are actually claiming Madonna is, in some ways, more effective at discipling nations than the church. That's a huge statement. What's the basis for that?
The metric they seem to be using is the speed and breadth of cultural normalization. How quickly and widely can an idea be made to seem normal, acceptable, even desirable, especially to young people?
Like specific examples.
They point to things like her global concerts, reaching huge audiences in places like Japan, or think about moments like that infamous televised kiss with Britney Spears.
God.
That single moment, broadcast instantly around the world, communicated a message about sexuality, pleasure, and breaking norms far more effectively, they argue, than countless sermons trying to teach a different view. No theological defense needed, just image and emotion.
So the argument is that pop culture and media, especially social media now, can embed ideas into the youth consciousness almost overnight.
And often bypass traditional gatekeepers, including religious institutions. It's a stark assessment of where cultural power resides in shaping the next generation's values.
Wow. Okay. So intellectuals generate ideas, artists popularize and normalize them. Who's at the bottom of this pyramid?
At the bottom, you find the professionals. This is where the lawyers, the politicians, the business leaders come in.
And what do?
They take the ideas that have been seeded by the intellectuals and spread by the artists, and they, quote, make physical things out of the ideas.
Meaning?
They build institutions based on these ideas. They create businesses, organizations, and crucially, they write laws.
So the laws come last in this process, reflecting ideas that have already permeated the culture.
That's the argument. Think about postmodern ideas like the source says that there's no objective reality or no universal reason. If those ideas take root, first in academia, then popularized through art and media, eventually you'll see professionals creating laws that reflect them. Maybe laws about gender identity based on subjective feeling rather than objective biology, or regulations about compelled speech, like using specific pronouns.
So the laws are downstream from the culture, which is downstream from the artists, which is downstream from the thinkers.
That's the model they present. And they emphasize that the things we see happening today, maybe things that seem shocking or sudden, like extreme ideologies cropping up on campuses, they aren't sudden at all.
They've been percolating for a long time.
For generations, often,
Right.
working their way down that cultural pyramid.
Okay, so if the root of the issue is a flawed worldview, a problematic narrative that's spread vertically, then the solution has to involve pushing back with a better narrative, right? Reforming the culture.
Exactly, and it has to start with the foundation. Where do we get the right narrative?
The sources point back to the Bible.
Consistently. But not just as a book of devotional thoughts or stories for Sunday school. They urge us to see it as something much more comprehensive.
Like an owner's manual.
That's the phrase they use, the owner's manual for all of life. Written by the maker, explaining how the world he made actually works best.
Covering everything, not just religious topics.
Everything. History, health, economics, agriculture, relationships, justice. Even things like city planning. It's meant to provide the foundational principles for flourishing in every area of life.
Which means we need to treat it as the standard, the measuring stick for our work, our vocations, not just our private spiritual lives.
Absolutely. That's the core of cultural reformation, they argue. It's not about withdrawing from the world, but engaging it with God's principles.
Like that example of the young woman studying city planning.
Yes, that was fascinating. She decided to read the entire Bible, Genesis to Revelation, but specifically looking for every mention, every principle related to city planning.
Wow, that takes dedication.
It does. But she diligently compiled God's thoughts on community, design, environment, justice within a city,
Yeah.
how to build places where people can truly thrive according to his design.
That's taking the owner's manual concept seriously and
Yeah.
applying it directly to her field.
Exactly. And that, the sources suggest, is the path to practical reformation. It's not about waiting for some political savior.
It's about us, where we are.
Yes, it's about forming small groups within your own profession. Teachers getting together, healthcare workers, lawyers, engineers, business people, whoever you are, whatever you do.
And doing what?
Studying God's word together, specifically asking, what are the biblical principles for our field? How can we apply them to reform our practices, our institutions, our part of the culture?
Reforming culture one field at a time, as they put it.
One field at a time, which brings us back to that idea of the gathered versus the scattered church.
Right, the visual with the arrows.
The church gathers on Sunday. Maybe think of that as the white arrows pointing inward for worship, teaching, encouragement, necessary refueling. Then the church scatters on Monday, the black arrows pointing outward back into their vocations, their communities, their spheres of influence.
And that's where the mission primarily happens.
That's where the discipling of the nation, the influencing of culture actually takes place. In the scattering, empowered by the gathering.
Okay, this is powerful stuff.
Hmm.
It can also feel overwhelming, can it? Like, what difference can I really make?
Yes. The sources address that feeling directly. That sense of fatalism, the I'm just one drop in the ocean mentality.
The feeling that the world is just going downhill and there's nothing we can do.
Right. And the sources are incredibly clear on this. That feeling of powerlessness, that resignation, it is not a biblical concept.
What is it then?
They actually label it a Hindu concept. The idea that effort is ultimately meaningless, absorbed by the vastness of the unchangeable system. Like throwing a rock into a huge lake, it just disappears, no effect.
Okay, so what's the biblical concept?
The Christian concept, they say, is that when you throw a rock into a lake, even a small one, it creates ripples. And those ripples spread out, eventually reaching the farthest shore.
Your actions have consequences, they matter.
Profoundly. So the message is, don't be paralyzed by the lie of powerlessness. Real, lasting transformation doesn't start with sweeping government programs.
It starts with individuals.
It starts with a renewed worldview, fueled by individuals courageously using their voices, their gifts, right where they are, in their families, their work, their communities.
You're called to be, what was it, a Genesis 1 Christian?
A Genesis 1 Christian, participating with God in stewarding and shaping creation. Not a Genesis 3 Christian, hiding from responsibility because things are difficult or broken.
So, the final takeaway, the challenge.
It really raises an important question for every single person listening. Are you ready? Are you willing to lead the Reformation right where you are, starting this Monday? In your sphere of influence, what ripple will you start?